Hi, my name is Dominic Palazzolo, and I'm the owner of Marvelous Molds. And in this video, which we've titled Troubleshooting with Onlays, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a step-by-step process in educating and telling you all the tricks of the trade, little things that you should know in order to work with onlays very effectively. You know, over the last year and a half, I've had the opportunity of traveling all over the world demonstrating silicone onlays and my molds at many cake shows. And the thing that I find interesting is that it doesn't matter what country I'm in, the questions about how to use a silicone onlay are always the same. So what I decided to do was I want to make this video, and we're going to go in depth, step by step, and cover all of the little details and things that you should know so that you can use an onlay with confidence and create great designs on your cake. The first step, the first thing that I want to tell you is that we need to condition our fondant so that it works very well with onlays and also when you're using fondant with molds. Something you have to understand is that any recipe that you make or any fondant that you buy is manufactured so that it has a consistency to be rolled out and used to cover a cake. And you need a certain tackiness, you need a certain moisture, you need a certain elasticity in order to do that well. And I think the manufacturers do a good job of that. What you need to understand, though, is that in order to work with an onlay effectively, we have to change the properties of fondant. And we do that by adding a material called Tylose. Now, Tylose is also known as CMC. They are one and the same material. And what we do is we add that to the fondant, and what happens is the Tylose or CMC is a gum, and it absorbs that free-floating moisture, the sugar syrup, the things that cause tackiness, and it gives it a great structure. So one of the first and most fundamental steps is to condition your fondant by adding Tylose. Now, what I would recommend is that you use or start out with about a half a teaspoon, okay? This is an example of Tylose that I bought at Michael's. It's a Wilton product. Many of you have probably heard of CK products. If you go anywhere where they offer cake decorating supplies, you should be able to buy Tylose or CMC. It's a standard. What I like to do is to 1 pound of fondant, I like to add or start out with 1/2 teaspoon of Tylose. I sprinkle it on my mat and I work it into the fondant. So today we're using Satin Ice. It's a product that I really like. Satin Ice is similar to a lot of other products as far as its consistency. You know, they all have their own characteristics, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with Satin Ice today. I'm working with blue so that you can see how it incorporates itself into that. So I have my blue Satin Ice fondant here, and I want you to know that this is a pound, okay? For you Europeans and other people outside the United States, this is about a little less than a half a kilo. And many cake decorators have asked me, well, how do you incorporate a gum like Tylose into fondant? And let me show you, it's a pretty simple process. I'll take this half teaspoon and I'm just going to sprinkle it down on my work surface, okay? And then I'm going to just work this in to my fondant, okay? So all you do is just knead it right in there, and you can see how it's just a very fine powder. And if you just keep on working it on your work surface, it will be incorporated into your fondant. Okay? So what do you think happens as we're incorporating this gum? Well, what happens is that think of each one of these little microscopic particles of tylose just kind of evenly mixed throughout the fondant, and next to it is water, sugar syrup, corn syrup, and other things that are moist. And what it will naturally do is it will absorb these liquids and it will swell. And that process is exactly what's going to happen in order to change this consistency. The fondant is going to become less tacky, less sticky, and it's going to have a nice structure. When we use fondant like this with our molding or onlays, it has the type of structure so that it takes great impressions, but it can be manipulated by the onlay in a much better way. I wish that I could provide you with some magic formula for every product that's made out there. You know, hey, it's a half a teaspoon to a half a kilo or a half a teaspoon to a pound. But you know what? I really can't, because all the fondant products are different and they have different moisture contents. Some are firmer than others. And so all I can tell you is that you should take your favorite fondant, start out with a half a teaspoon, work it in and let it sit for about a half an hour, and then come back and feel the fondant and see if it's actually changed in consistency and if it doesn't have that tackiness. And then try working with it with an onlay and see if you can use that and it helps you work better and faster with the onlay. Now let's say that you added a half a teaspoon and that wasn't enough. Okay, well, you know what? Take maybe a quarter teaspoon more, sprinkle it on your mat, incorporate it in, wait about a half an hour, and then you're going to find for your favorite fondant, what is that magic addition, what is that amount of tylose that you can incorporate into the fondant so you get the right consistency for working with onlays or molds. So, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to let it sit for 30 minutes, an hour, overnight. Everything is good. It's just going to do its job, change the consistency, and give you something that is much more suitable for working with a silicone onlay. Now that we've conditioned our fondant, and in this segment I am using white fondant. I know I was using blue fondant in the previous segment just so you can see the tylose contrast with the blue color. But this is fondant mixed with tylose. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of that, and it has a nice firm consistency, nice and dry. Okay, so here's what I tell people. I want you to use some type of a sheeter, okay? I think it's very, very important that you follow this step. Now, I have talked to bakers and all kinds of people, and they take a big rolling pin like this, and they slam this, and they're rolling it out like, like biscuit dough. And that's really, really not the way you want to go with an onlay. We need to roll this out about a 1/16 of an inch thick. And what's really, really important is that it's uniform throughout its length and width. And you accomplish that by actually using something like a sheeter. Now, I have this pasta machine or clay roller, okay? And we sell these at marvelousmolds.com. I really like it because it's kind of wide and it has a Teflon coated roller, or two rollers coated with Teflon, and it does a great job, okay? I drop my handle here. You don't have to have a motorized, expensive piece of equipment. just about any pasta machine works, okay? And what you want to do is just roll it out thin enough so that you can get it through the pasta machine on the widest setting, okay? So that's all I'm doing, is just rolling it out. Now I know from experience using this that I want to roll this out to a setting of number 4. So I have it on a number 1, which is its most open setting. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it through the pasta machine. And that is on number 1. And I'm just going to go through this process. It's funny, many of you may know what this is. Okay, this is a pounce. It's basically a stocking or a nylon or a sheer sock that has cornstarch added into it. And so I like to use something that's really sheer like that, and then you just put cornstarch in it. And I like to get it in here and tie it, and I double wrap them. But I really like using a pounce because what I can do is just rub the top, and I put a very small amount of cornstarch, which helps it from sticking. And I'm just going to rifle right through the numbers here, just like that. And you know what? Why don't I show you this nice little attachment you could buy as an accessory, and you just put it in here and hook it on, and now you have something that's motorized. So if you do a large volume, you can use a motorized sheeter. It works really, really great. And you can just run it through, just like that. Something that I've developed as a habit. I'm on my setting number 4, but I run it through twice at a setting of number 4 in order to ensure that I have the right thickness. So when you do this, it basically guarantees that you're going to have almost a fabric-like result that's extremely uniform, and that goes a long way in helping you just peel off perfect onlay applications to a side of a cake. You know, I was raised in a bakery. I'm very, very good with the rolling pin, but after I add Tylose to fondant, I find it very, very difficult to roll the fondant as thin and as evenly as it needs to be. And so I almost insist that if you're serious about using an onlay, get yourself a pasta machine, get yourself a sheeter. The pasta attachment on your KitchenAid is a wonderful thing. I usually go to a setting of number 3 or 4 on that attachment, and it works perfectly. So my second recommendation to you is to use some type of a sheeting tool in order to create a perfect, beautiful, thin piece of fondant that works very, very well with the onlays. Once you get used to using this, you'll find that it has great application in a lot of other cake decorating processes, like when you're making shoes or putting fabric onto dolls or figures. You may really like and find that this is an amazing tool to add to your arsenal. Now that we have the fondant sheeted to the proper thickness, now remember, the fondant has been mixed with Tylose, so it has a nice, dry, firm feel to it. It'll feel like silk or a fabric. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually place this over the onlay. So I really use a pounce at this point. What I'm going to do is, if you have a new onlay, you should season it with cornstarch by putting a lot on there, okay? Like more than you ever would put on. And then what I like to do is kind of mix it in there. And then I just want to get all the excess off so that I have this 1 molecule thick coating of cornstarch all over the onlay. Now, let me show you something about a pounce real quick. If you want a lot, see, you can put it down, you can pounce it, but if you don't want a lot, you can just rub a surface and it'll put a very light kind of a patina over your fondant. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rub this side, and that side goes down onto my onlay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to push down with my fingertips, and you should immediately see the pattern of the onlay coming through. This is the first sign that you're having success, is just by pressing down with your hands, just your fingers, okay? You should see that pattern coming through. Now, a couple years ago when I invented the onlay and introduced it, what I would do at this point is I would take a rolling pin and I'd start rolling. But you know, I found out that there's an easier, better way. I like to take a fondant smoother, and what I'm going to do is just press it down onto my fondant over the onlay, and my first presses are simply to get the fondant trapped into that bladed pattern, okay? Now what I'm going to do is press down and turn, and you should see the blades coming through almost immediately. Okay? And so if you press down and just turn a quarter of a turn, you will see the blades coming through, and they look just like lines, and that is really, really great. Now, another nice thing that I like about using a fondant smoother is we want to see unbroken lines. We want to see all these nice little lamp-shaped patterns in the Moroccan onlay just really popping through. And you might see areas where you can take your fondant smoother and really concentrate, okay? So that's what I do. Now, if you want to take a rolling pin at this point, it's very trapped. You can rub it back and forth. But you can see this beautiful pattern just popping right through, and that is what you're looking for. If you rolled this too thick, you're not going to be able to get a really clean line. And you're going to see some inner areas that are bulging. Trust me, it's a useless fight to try to overcome fondant that's too thick. It's better just to start over, find out what's the proper setting so that you get something very, very level. If we made it too thin, it'll actually cup or bow inward in these areas. When we apply our adhesive, it's going to kind of pool there, and that is something that, you know, could work against you. So really, you want to find the exact thickness that goes right across the onlay, just like you see it here. Now that we have our fondant pressed into the onlay correctly, I think this might be one of the most important next steps. And I want to say something to all of you out there. I don't know why in the industry some great cake decorators and teachers have kind of miscommunicated the next step that I'm going to share with you. There is instruction out there that is advocating and suggesting that at this point you start to remove the sections in the onlay pattern that you don't want to apply to the cake. But really, the next step is to take some type of an edible glue. Now, I recommend that you could make a very effective glue with 3 parts of corn syrup or glucose and 1 part of water. It's extraordinarily tacky, very, very sticky. There are glue mixtures. People will take Tylose and mix it with water. And what you should do when evaluating an adhesive is to put it between your finger and thumb and just work it. It should become sticky, kind of uncomfortable. That's a good glue. But if it feels like a lubricant, okay, if it's very, very slimy, that's not going to work for you. So, one of the glues that I recommend is 3 parts of corn syrup and 1 part of water. And I am going to apply the glue right now, okay? So this kind of goes against what seems to be the proper step. We would take out all the pieces, right? And then we would apply our glue. But let's think about that. If I were to take out, let's say, all these centers, these little lantern-shaped centers, I would be left with a very thin lattice. And in order to apply the glue, I would have to spend a long time trying to get glue on just this little track of fondant without getting it on the silicone open spaces that are all around it. Another thing that you should know is, well, think of this. Have you ever been working with like maybe a knife or some kind of a tool with fondant, and you'll get a buildup on the edge? It always happens, and it's kind of the nature of fondant and other materials that we work with. And that's because there's a lot of sugar, it's very crystalline, and it's kind of half moist. And so every layer of that is going to dry into some kind of a crusty thing that dulls your blades. Well, you know what? That happens to silicone or any blade. And as I push the fondant over this blade, there's little sugar bridges that you won't be able to see them, but they're strong enough just to get in your way when you're trying to remove the pieces that you don't want. So the application of an adhesive provides the moisture that enables you to remove these pieces very quick and cleanly without grabbing the portion of the fondant that you want to remain in the onlay. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the excess, and I'm just going to take that off. Now, you have 2 choices here. I can remove the centers, these lantern-shaped designs, and I will be left with a beautiful Moroccan lattice pattern. But if you want, you could remove the lattice and have these centers remain in the onlay, and that would create an application on a cake of equidistant lantern-shaped decorations on your cake. And the actual space in between those solid pieces will be a lattice. Some strategies that I've seen are, some people, if they have a multi-tiered wedding cake, they'll put the lattice on one tier, and then they'll put the centers on the next tier. And it really, really gives you some variety that people especially appreciate. So let's talk about removing what we don't want. Most people like to see the lattice on the cake, so we're going to remove the centers, okay? Now, take something like this plastic needle tool that I have. Don't take an X-Acto knife or something really, really sharp. And imagine a plane that's coming in and then taking off. you don't want to come straight down into it. You want to come like a plane landing on a runway and then taking off again, all right? Of course, we don't have to do it that exaggerated. It looks like this. Now watch how nice that removes, okay? I've seen so many people struggling with onlays because they didn't apply the glue when they should have, which helps them remove these centers. You should be able to just move just like that and remove this deck of cards, and I'm just going to put it with the rest of my fondant scrap right here, okay? So you can see that when you follow my recommendations and get accustomed to working with an onlay, this all becomes very easy and very quick. Now, here's the question. What are we going to do with the centers that we took out, all the scrap fondant? And I believe that this is why cake decorators do not want to apply the glue in the way I did at that certain place before we remove the centers. And it's because they think that the glue will render this fondant useless, okay? Look on any label for fondant and you're going to find water, you're going to find corn syrup, and you're going to find just about any ingredient that you would use to make glue. So all you're doing is giving this tired fondant a drink, okay? Simply work it back in. You're not going to have to throw it away. You're not ruining anything. I have perfectly usable fondant that I can incorporate into my batch and use it over and over again. So I actually think that it is a cake decorator subconsciously thinking that, gee, if I put the glue on and I take those pieces out, I'm going to render the fondant, I'm going to have to throw it away. And that's simply not the case. So make sure that you take advantage of gluing at the proper time so that you can remove the centers, the pieces you don't want on the cake, very quickly and perfectly. Now we're going to get to the fun part, where we're actually going to take the onlay and we're going to use it to apply it to a cake. What I want to run through with you is some pre-prep so that you can help this pattern transfer onto the cake successfully. Remember, the onlay is made out of silicone, so you can actually stretch it. You can stretch it, and when you do that in different directions, what actually happens is that this pattern kind of comes out of its design and lays back in. And you're incorporating a very micro thin layer of air behind it, which is a good thing. Another thing that I like to do is I'll grab the silicone onlay where there's no fondant, and I will run my fingers underneath it while stretching. And you can see how I can get this pattern to kind of lift up and lay back down into the onlay itself. All you're doing is ensuring that you've got something nice and loose. Now, you would think that if I lifted this onlay up in order to apply it to the cake, since we loosened it so much, that it would actually fall out, but it doesn't. The onlay will hold it because three sides of this design are being held by the silicone that we designed. So here's our cake, and as you can see, I've got a couple patterns on there already, okay? Because I want to show you how to apply the onlay, number one, but how to do it when, after you've got one pattern on. Now, I'm going to be doing this backwards so that you can see it. Normally, you're going to be working very comfortably like this. I am going to have to do this backwards. Now, we made an announcement, and I'm sure you notice that the onlays are clear, And one of the big reasons why we did this was it's really, really going to help you line up the onlay with an existing pattern that's already been put onto the cake. Let me show you something very interesting about the onlay. If you notice, there is a kind of a flange on the top and the sides and on the other side, but the bottom there is no flange. And that's so you can always know what is the bottom of the onlay, which is meant to sit on a surface that's level with the cake that you can use to guide and stay level as you approach the surface of your cake. Okay? So, notice the end of this pattern is going to be meeting up with the end of this panel right here. Well, I'm going to show you how to do this. What I do is I come in here just with one side and I kind of park it right next to the design that's already there, and I'm just working on lining up one side. Now, you can look through that onlay and you can see for yourself, have I lined it up correctly? Is it nice and close? And then without stretching the onlay, just bring it around and then rub it. Okay? So, when you are applying the onlay, what I want you to do is always concentrate on the perimeter. That's the bottom and the sides and the top, and push your fondant onto the surface of the cake. Then go ahead and concentrate where the fondant is. You can take a fondant scraper, a fondant smoother, put a little cornstarch on it, and you can use that, which is also extremely effective. And then what I want you to do is we're going to go into actually removing it, okay? So I'm just checking everything. That looks absolutely stellar. Okay? Now I was in England one time, and when I started to demonstrate onlays, I used to take the onlay off very slow. And there was an elderly cake decorator held in high esteem, and she wanted to pull off the onlay, and she grabbed that and she ripped it off like a Band-Aid. But I realized that that's actually a good strategy. So what I want you to do is to grab this, okay? If you want to go slow, sure, that's fine, but just pull that off just like that. And if you have followed the steps that I've reviewed with you, it's a perfect application of this design right on the side of the cake. This side will never be exactly meeting with the panel that was applied before, because we have a blade that separates those designs. While the fondant is fresh, go ahead and just push those together, and you will eliminate the gap that would exist. And see, you can hardly tell where we stopped, where we started, each panel running into each other perfectly. We're moving into the segment of this instructional video where we're going to be coming all the way around, okay? So I'm going to do this kind of quick. I'm just going to get my onlay lined up, bring it around, get it on there, and take it off. Do you see how quick that is? Oh no, I'm left with a gap. Let's talk about this, okay? This onlay has been made 2 times the length of pi. I did that because we did a lot of mathematical calculations, and we found that if I made this 2 times the length of pi, what would happen is that any even diameter cake that is 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, if it's exactly 8 inches or 10 inches or 12 inches and on, you should be able to apply these 2 pie panels, and this edge will meet with this edge. Well, this is an 8-inch cake dummy, and I simply just applied some fondant. And as you can see, we obviously must not have an exact 8-inch diameter, and that's going to happen to you all the time. So it isn't this magic formula that guarantees that you're always going to meet up and have no gaps, okay? But it does give you a clue. When you're making a real cake, you can trim that knowing what your crumb coat and the thickness of your fondant is going to be, so that you end up with a diameter darn close. And if you do so, these panels should meet up perfectly. So, what do we do when we have this gap? Well, what I like to do is I like to take my onlay and just kind of lay it lightly over there and look at the pattern. What part of my onlay can I use in order to fill this gap and make it look like there is no back of the cake. There is no area where it's going to not meet up. And I'm kind of lucky, because it seems as though if I were to make just this segment of the onlay, it seems like that's going to fill it pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and fill this onlay, just this section of it, and I'll be back, and let's see if I'm right. Let's see if I can fill this gap acceptably and make a really pretty cake. I've resheeted some fondant, and if you'll remember, what we want to do is we just want to fill one of these segments with fondant, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little mark, and because I can see through the onlay now, this is really great. Just going to make a kind of a mark a little wider than what I need. Okay? And then I'll just go ahead and cut myself a segment here. Okay. Going to apply a little cornstarch just to help us make a good transfer. Going to apply my micro layer of cornstarch over the side that I put down onto the onlay. And you know what? It's all the same. Push down with my fingers. Take a fondant smoother. Press lightly in the beginning. Then press and turn. See that? Wait for the lines to reveal themselves. I don't ever have to think about thickness anymore, because I know a number 4 on this machine is going to give it to me every time. So that makes things wonderful. Okay? What do you think the next step is? I would say, as I always teach, apply the glue. Apply the glue now. Do yourself a favor. Make life easy, okay? Apply the glue now. Now we can deal with taking away the excess. I'm just going to simply take that off. Going to remove that. I'll remove that center and that center. What am I going to do with this? I'm going to put it right back into my fondant, work it in, give my tired fondant a drink, which will revitalize it and help me use it for a longer period of time. Okay, stretch. Make that pop, okay? Remember the edges. That's what's important. Get those edges to kind of come out, get some air underneath it. Okay, I know that, I'm wondering, okay, just checking the stickiness of it. It feels good. All right. Remember, this is going to be a lot easier for you. I'm doing this backwards so that the camera can catch it. So I'm just going to take a near empty onlay, as you can see here. And I am just going to be applying one segment. Now I'm going to kind of line it up in the center over, I'm just watching to see that I can fit it in. I'm doing it just like I always do with the onlays. It being clear helps me a lot. You can see right through that, okay? Check, your alignment. Okay. Always work on the perimeters. You can see where the fondant is. Let's go ahead and remove that. Okay, look at that. I'm going to push this fresh fondant over to its neighbor on each side. And as you can see, I have filled the gap perfectly, okay? You tell me where that extra piece was, okay? There you have it. A perfect application of this highly popular pattern onto the cake. So that's how you fill gaps. We've explained the 2π length and how you use that. So now you know how you can recover if the panels don't fit perfectly, which most often they probably won't. All right, so I'd like to review something with you. When you look at a silicone onlay, it's 2 times the length of pi, which is 6.28 inches long, and it's 4 inches tall. So a lot of my friends in the UK have asked me, well, what do I do when I have a cake that's only 3 inches tall? How do I use the silicone onlay? And so I'd like to show you. Typically, the standard in the United States is a 4-inch cake, but you're going to have cakes of all different sizes. So let's say that we're going to be working with a cake and it's only 3 inches tall. We can use the onlay by just taking a ruler and cutting an actual 3-inch wide strip. So you would just cut the width that you want to apply to the cake, and then go ahead and apply it right onto the onlay and use the onlay as you normally would. So I'm going to take my pounce and I'm just going to lightly rub the top surface. A very light amount of cornstarch has been applied without really affecting the color. That's what I like so much about a pounce. And then I'm going to lay this 3 inches right on my onlay and just lining it up with the bottom. Going to take my fondant smoother, just kind of press it down so it really gets in there. And then we'll be going into the press and turn method here to really make those blades pop through. Now you may notice that I'm using blue fondant this time on a white cake. And I did that so that you can see that it really doesn't matter what color fondant you're using. You're going to see these blades coming through really, really nice. They'll appear just as solid lines. Okay, so I'm going to apply my adhesive. This is, again, 3 parts water. I'm sorry, 3 parts corn syrup, 1 part water. Going to take away the excess. Now, you may feel like, gee, the pattern really hasn't been finished, but look how nice 3 inches comes right to the center of the lantern shape. So you get a repeating beautiful pattern anyway, and that'll happen just about anywhere on this pattern. So I'm going to remove the centers. Going to give it a nice stretch. As you can see, we're only using 3 inches from the bottom up the length of the onlay, and it works just like if you had filled the onlay. So why don't we put that on a cake and see what it looks like. So what I'm going to do is just follow the same procedures that we covered earlier. Just going to line this up on one side, bring it around, rub it onto the cake. Make sure you're hitting the perimeter. And now we're going to take it off and put the ends together. And now you can see how we are applying only a 3-inch height. Now, this is a 4-inch cake. I did that on purpose because I wanted you to see what you could do with a 4-inch cake. You know, you don't always have to cover the entire side of a cake from top to bottom with an onlay pattern. You might want to use it as a really nice border and make it even half as high. Maybe just a little border around the bottom and another one around the top. There's so many different things that you can do with a silicone onlay by using only portions of its height in order to create different decorations on a cake. For my friends out in the UK and Australia and those of you who make really shallow cakes, this is the way to go. So you could still take advantage of an onlay made to American standards, but you can see how it can be adapted just about for any application all around the world. One of the most popular onlays is the chevron onlay, because the onlay does an amazing job in taking these parallel zigzag lines and putting them on a cake perfectly, which is really, really hard to do if you're going to put each one of those lines on independently and manually with your own hands. So this segment really is to address a question I get about the onlays, but why don't we just start out with the basic technique. I have my medium chevron filled, and I've already applied the glue. And so in order to create a really nice chevron pattern, what you do is from the bottom, just keep your blue chevron in there and just take out every other one, just like that. Okay? Now remember, this is reusable. We're not going to throw this away. Okay? So it's really always the same process. Watch when I stretch that onlay. Do you see the points of these chevrons kind of popping out of the onlay itself? And then what they do is they settle back in. And I really, really like to do that. We're going to bring in this cake And let me put this on for you. Really, it's the same drill over and over. Just put your bottom on a level surface, bring one side to the cake, bring it around, and then press it on there. Just like that. And we're just going to take it right off. Isn't that great? You just get a perfect application every time. Okay, so here's the question that I get. What my customers say to me is, wait, you know, it's really fine to have that kind of chevron pattern, but what if I don't want the color of the cake to be coming through? What if I want to have a totally different multicolored chevron application to the cake? Well, that's what I'm going to show you, is a very quick and easy method in order to get a multicolor application on your cake. So, if we're going to make a multicolored chevron pattern on the cake, the first thing you want to decide is, well, what would the colors be? So let's imagine that we're going to go with blue and pink, okay, alternating down the side of a cake. Here's what you want to do. Take your silicone onlay and go ahead and put one of the colors in. On this onlay, I've put the pink. And notice that I have it all prepped, but I haven't applied any glue, and I wouldn't want you to do that. All I want you to do is stretch it really good and make sure that they're all separated. You see, we don't have the glue to melt all those little sugar bridges. So what you want to do is kind of bend the onlay just so that, you know, it almost looks like, you know, a crocodile's back, okay? You can see all those points coming up like that. And I'm going to take my onlay, and what I'm going to do is just turn it over, and then I'm going to simply unmold my pink chevrons, okay? Now, I already have another onlay loaded, but you certainly can use just on one onlay. You don't need to use two. I'm just doing this for efficiency. So let's imagine that we've reloaded the onlay with blue. Okay, so it's very simple. What you want to do is we want to alternate these colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of loosen the end here, or you could just pick up your onlay and just grab it. And I'm going to take out a blue chevron, and then I'm going to take the pink, turn it over so it goes back into its original position, and just set it right in there. So you probably never realized that every one of these chevron lines is a perfect duplication of the others, and we did that on purpose so you could make these kinds of color substitutions. So really it's just very simple. We're just going to take out the color that we don't want, and then we're going to put in the color that we do want. Okay? So I've got one more to remove. Just take it out. And put it in. And there you have it. What you've done is you've just made some substitutions. If you look over here, you have more chevrons to use to make more substitutions and continue this pattern. So what do we do now? Well, it's basically the same drill. We're going to take our glue and we're going to apply it now over the multicolored pattern in your chevron onlay. Okay? So we're just going to apply the glue. Now, one thing is that when you do all of this, they're kind of loose inside these tracks. Just be careful with your sticky glue and just apply it. Always remember that applying it very uniformly and covering the total surface is what's important. Now that I have the glue applied, why don't we put it on the cake and see what it looks like? Remember, you've made the color substitutions in the onlay, but don't fool yourself into thinking that you can take these individual pieces and go ahead and apply glue and start putting these on manually. Take advantage of the silicone onlay itself, okay? This is called, my patent is called a design transfer device, okay? So use this onlay to transfer your design onto the cake so that you can do it perfectly every time. Same method, just simply taking one side, keeping it level, bringing it across. We're going to rub it onto the cake. And then we're going to peel and reveal. And there you have it, a multicolored chevron application. So, you may think, well, okay, that's how we can only do multicolors with the chevron, but actually, you can do this with all of our onlays. Just simply choose the parts of the patterns that you would like to substitute, and you can make really beautiful decorations on your cake, tying into the important colors that you want to project. And it's a really great effect. And now that you know the process, it's a lot simpler than you would think. So we've been applying beautiful patterns to fondant covered cakes with the silicone onlay. And what I want to talk about now is how do we apply the same designs to a buttercream cake? So, buttercream is very soft, very sticky, and the novice, someone who's never worked with the silicone onlay, tends to think that you can't use it with a buttercream cake. But actually you really can, okay? So I have a buttercream iced cake right here. And the trick is to either let it develop a skin, which buttercream will do, or refrigerate it so that the fats in the buttercream solidify, and therefore the whole icing, the buttercream itself, becomes kind of like a shell. So I'm touching this really lightly, as you can see, and it is a surface, okay? It's not so sticky like I showed you in this bucket of just raw buttercream. What you can do then is just take your silicone onlay and apply it in the same manner that you would any other cake. Okay, again, one side onto the cake, and then bring the other side around without stretching it. Now, the buttercream obviously is a lot softer than your fondant, okay? And so you have to be careful not to push too hard on the design, okay? Because what you'll do is you will press that design into the cake, and it's going to be flush with your buttercream. It'll still look good, but the best effect for the designs that you put on your cake with an onlay is if they're riding on the top and there's some separation and texture to the design. So what you want to do is just carefully apply it, okay? And make sure that you've rubbed it. Again, using a fondant smoother is always a good idea. It presents a surface that's much flatter than your hand, okay? And then, you know, you might, if this is your first time, you might want to just check. Let's see, am I getting release? And then what we'll do is we'll just take it off, okay? And make a few corrections. And there you have it. A onlay design transferred onto a buttercream cake. Now, I'm in Ohio, and a lot of people here don't necessarily like a fondant-covered cake. I mean, where you're using just fondant. They like their buttercream. And so when you're making a cake for friends or family or customers, you may find that a lot of people really want buttercream. They just don't like the taste of fondant, or they're unfamiliar with it. So what you see here is a hybrid cake, okay? Where we've actually iced it with buttercream, and then we use the silicone onlay to apply a very beautiful fondant design. Now, the silicone onlay can actually be a gateway for you to introduce the use of fondant on cakes. No one is going to object to this kind of beauty and this kind of mixing of different materials. There's not a lot of fondant here to eat. They're still getting their buttercream. And then once they have a cake like this, they're going to be more open and kind of receptive to the use of fondant. So try a hybrid cake. Try using an onlay on your buttercream iced cakes. I think you'll find that it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you can provide beautiful cakes to your friends and customers. We're going to go into some advanced studies here concerning the onlays, and I want to show you some design aspects that some of you may know about, some of you may be discovering as I show them to you on this video. But let's take the splash onlay, okay? And what I want to show you is that there are guides on the onlay that I'm pointing out right here. We call them bumpers. And what these are actually created for is to help you take one panel of an onlay and space it perfectly on the other side of a panel that you're putting around a cake, okay? So this is an example of our original product, which is not clear, but I have filled the clear onlay, and you can see that it still has those same type of bumpers, okay? So the question is, well, what the heck are those? And let me show you. I'll bring this cake over. And as you can see, I've already put a splash panel on the cake. And what I want to do now is I want to point out these types of leading edges that remain once we put the pattern on the cake, okay? And the bumpers are meant to actually hug against some of these details. And you can simply take the onlay and almost parallel park it right in there. And the bumpers will line up with the panel that you placed there previously. And then when that happens, you know that you have perfect spacing. So why don't we do that right now, okay? If you can just look close here, okay? I've got a bumper here and a bumper here. So let's discover, what does that go against, okay? And so when I take my onlay and I put it in here, Let me just take it around, put it on the cake. What I'm hoping that you see is that my bumper is going around this kind of paisley splash detail, and my other bumper is right up here going up against another detail, okay? So what you can then do is you can go ahead and press your onlay on there. And when you have those bumpers or guides positioned correctly, then you have no doubt that you're going to get a perfect spacing and a perfect continuation of the pattern around your cake. Okay, so I just want to take some time to make sure under these hot lights everything dries out very, very quickly. It's kind of a challenge for cake decorating. But what I want to now do is just remove the panel, and let's see how well that lined up. Okay? Okay, so sometimes things are not perfect. We're going to have to make a little correction there, put that piece on. But now let's look at the splash pattern. You know, it's kind of hard if you're just going to eyeball this and decide, all right, how do I get this in there? But look at the progression from the beginning over these two applications, and it is absolutely perfect as far as spacing, and you cannot tell where we stopped and where we started, and that's the whole idea of using the bumpers that you will find on many of the onlays. So now let's look at another onlay, and I'm going to show you the original style, which is solid. It's not see-through, but I want to point out, okay, so where are the guides or the bumpers on the Bird and Blossom onlay? And we have, as you can see, they're situated right here and right here, and then we have this little corner here and one right here. Okay, so what's interesting is to see where does this line up when you've put the Bird and Blossom on a cake. So now we're going to shift to the clear, which shows you that a lot better. Okay, so let me just do a little stretching here so we get a nice transfer. Okay, so I want you to watch this little corner right there, okay? And right here. Where does that line up on this Bird and Blossom panel? The reason why I'm showing you this is because this is one of the most unusually shaped onlays. It's very organic, you know, kind of holding a very natural kind of a design. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this corner and it's going to hit right here. It's going to park right here, okay? And when I've got that set, what happens then is that my other bumper fits right around that flower, okay? Now this might be a very difficult onlay to try to eyeball, okay? You know, you're trying to judge this organic, complex, beautiful design. You know, you might get it wrong, and so that's why we put those guidelines in there, okay? So, you know, just making sure I have good contact. Just making sure. Okay, so let's take this baby off. Let's see how that's working. Okay. Now, do you see how naturally the next panel fits right underneath what we had put on the cake already? Look at how even that design is, the spacing. And that's how you'll proceed around your cake. Okay? So, I just wanted to point out to you that on every onlay, we help you by designing in bumpers or guides so that you could space them perfectly and get that effect on a cake. We even have more to help you, and I'll show you that in just a second. I would like to show you another onlay. This is the scallop lattice onlay. Now this is an example of a silicone onlay that doesn't really have the bumpers or the guides that I showed you. It has something else though, okay? And many of you who own one of these, now this is an example of our original style, which was not clear. You may have wondered, what are these openings on the side, okay? And see that? They're just like these openings. Well, we call those windows. And if you look, you will see that these windows line up with the edges of the design in the onlay. And what these windows do is enable you to be able to see through the onlay so that you can pair this up with the previously applied panel and put it right on the leading edge. So let me show you how that works, and we're going to do that with the clear green silicone onlay so you can see much better how that works, okay? Let me just take an opportunity to make sure that I've loosened my fondant in this onlay, okay? And so now what I'm going to do is, and I'm showing this to you on a flat piece, we're not doing it on a cake, because I think that you're going to get a much better picture of it, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm really kind of bringing the edge of the onlay, and I want these triangular edges to kind of slot in, and then you can see how the window gives you the ability to make sure that you're lining up with that leading edge. Then what you do is you go ahead and apply it, and then take your onlay off, and then push the sides together just like you would on the side of a cake. And so that is my explanation for what are these funny holes that you find in the onlay. It's just another thing that we've designed and engineered into the silicone onlay so that you can line them up on a cake and get things just about perfect. Well, that's about it for our video troubleshooting with onlays. I hope that I answered a lot of your questions and that you learned a lot. And if you did, I'd like to invite you to join our YouTube channel. That way, when we come out with more videos, you'll be the first to receive them right in your inbox. And when you go over to Marvelous Molds, join our newsletter, because not only will you find out about new videos, but you'll be finding out about new products. We have promotions, sales, discounts, all kinds of things that you can benefit from. So join our YouTube channel, join our newsletter at marvelousmolds.com, and I'll be seeing you in the near future with another interesting video. Thank you for watching.